Hello, and welcome to my Modlist showcase, where I give an overview and opinion on mod lists to help find the right one for you. This time we are looking at Librum by Scenic Route Games, released for Skyrim Special Edition and Skyrim VR, although I won't be getting into the VR details for this video. The version I've been playing on is version 3.0.6, released on the 24th of October 2022, and you can check on the list Discord linked below for any changes and updates. And it's worth noting that the authors are working on a huge game-changing update that will completely rework how Skyrim is played. But the reason I'm making a video for the list now is because the update could be around a year away at this point. So, firstly, what is Librum? The description reads, "It's a gritty, low-magic, hardcore survival adventure experience with an uncompromising vision. There's hundreds of new quests and locations, a total mechanics overhaul, and a complete makeover of the graphics and atmosphere. The path to your destiny as the Dragonborn will be long and treacherous. Welcome to Librum." You can download Librum from the Wabberjack Modlist installer, and while I won't be getting into the specifics of the installation, the process is explained with a step-by-step guide on their own website. Also, for further help with the download, and a general explanation of what Wabberjack is, you can watch my Wabberjack explanation guide video on my channel and linked below. So with over 1000 mods, it totals to around 140 gigabytes. And once installed, the guide talks you through some mods you may want to tweak, but none of it is necessary, and you can get to playing right away. This list leans into the dark, gritty side of Skyrim, offering better graphics targeted for mid to high range PCs. The tone is set with Obsidian weathers and True Storms, which provide new realistic weathers that change depending on the season. And it's further emphasised with the mods relighting Skyrim and enhanced lighting for EMB, which create more realistic ambience and make interiors dark, but not too dark. As for textures, Noble Skyrim is used as a base, while a plethora of smaller texture mods are layered on top. And the same goes for forests and flora, with cathedral landscapes being paired with a number of grass and tree mods, such as Northern Grass, the Flora of Skyrim, and more, which create a dense landscape that's easy to get lost in. Then there's the EMB, with ominous EMB providing a gloomy feel to Skyrim, more akin to games like Dark Souls. While I feel it fits the tone of this list, it may still be too dark for some, so you're free to swap it out with any compatible EMB of your choosing, or you can even switch it off entirely to save performance. And speaking of which, the performance will definitely test your PC's capabilities, but it's also very stable. For the most part, I held around 60 FPS with these specs here, and do remember that ultra-wide is very taxing in Bethesda games. When I entered dense areas around Falkreath and Riften for example, I did drop to around 50 FPS, but it was also very consistent instead of fluctuating up and down, so it really wasn't that noticeable. The install guide also offers a few helpful tips to improve performance, which I've not yet tried out. Librum is harsh and unforgiving, so much so that the list provides a handy survival guide for getting started. Although, there's enough new mechanics and customization to help your character make up for the increased difficulty. First there's the levelling, where now you no longer gain perk points when you level up, but instead you have to spend dragon souls to gain points. And once you have these points, there are new perks provided by the Valkyrie mod, which overhauls every perk tree to be more balanced and interesting, while keeping things a bit more vanilla compared to other perk mods. But before you even start levelling, you of course have to choose your race, and the Legacy Race Overhaul provides huge changes to every single one. They each have new advantages and disadvantages to really change up your playstyle. So just for an example, Imperials take 25% less damage when blocking, but 25% more damage when not, and so it encourages you to try out different playstyles with every race. For further customization, there's new standing stones provided by Curse of the Firmament, which each provide huge game-changing effects rather than the usual small buffs. For instance, the Mage Stone makes it so all spells and enchantments are 15% more powerful and last longer. However, attacks with physical weapons are now 50% less effective. The other side of customization comes from loot, and the Loot Ultimate mod makes it so equipment and enemies are all unleveled. As a brief explanation for what this means, usually Skyrim determines your loot and enemy difficulty depending on your level, but with everything de-leveled, it means you're more likely to find enemies that are far more powerful than you in the early game, and forces you to return to a difficult dungeon after you spend time leveling up and gearing yourself. It also makes the loot you find feel more rewarding, as you'll have to tackle some strong enemies if you want good gear early on. As you find this gear, you'll soon realise that there are a few spell tomes to be found, and that's because of the Spell Research mod, which requires you to spend time studying spells and gradually learn how to craft them through your research and skills with magic. There's also the Honed Metal mod, which allows you to pay mages and blacksmiths to craft and enchant your equipment. Moving on to more survival-based mods, Sunhelm provides the basic hunger, thirst and fatigue systems you come to expect with survival. And there's also Frostfall, which makes the cold weather give debuffs if you're not wearing appropriate clothing. And it pairs with the Campfire mod, which adds a new camping system for building tents, placing fire pits, and scavenging for resources. Then finally there's Hunterborn, which makes it so you have to properly dress and skin animals if you want to get any resources from their bodies. And I could honestly go on and on with the changes made to gameplay, so I suggest reading this handy gameplay guide on Librum's website. As you might have guessed, the combat difficulty is appropriately punishing, especially with the unleveled world, where early game, you can really just get bonked on the head a couple times and go down. The first big combat mod is Blade and Blunt, which slows down combat to make every strike more costly to stamina, and also more damaging. The mod comes with a ton of new features, but just to list off some of the most important, you'll no longer regenerate stamina while attacking, and drawing a bow will also drain it. And when you fall below 0 stamina, your character will experience a series of debuffs. However, to counter this, magicka and stamina both regenerate a little faster. With your weapon drawn and when attacking, you'll now move considerably slower. Attacking when the enemy is vulnerable will deal 50% more damage. And overall, damage values have been balanced depending on what difficulty you're playing on. While I've listed a good amount of changes, it's worth checking out the Blade and Blunt Nexus page for all the details. Moving on, there's even more stamina management with the Vigor mod, which affects your character's weight and how you move. For example, the stamina cost of your weapon swings are determined by their weight, and the jump cost is determined by your armour. There's also changes made to blocking, where a successful block will now lower your stamina rather than your health. Focusing on the enemies themselves, there's a number of mods which make them more interesting. Mortal enemies stop them from having aimbot-like accuracy. Skyrim Revamped makes enemies more aggressive and have new combat abilities. Know Your Enemy adds resistances and weaknesses depending on the creature's background and armour. And finally, in the gameplay section I mentioned the Legacy Race Overhaul, and many of these race changes apply to NPCs as well. Oh, and finally, again, third-person combat is improved with the True Directional Movement mod. With how dense the gameplay changes are, I was assuming that Librum would only have a couple of quest mods to go with it. But no, there's a huge amount of new quests and content, enough to add hundreds of hours to your playthrough. Firstly, there's the hugely popular Legacy of the Dragonborn, which adds a new museum to curate, along with a quest line and entire new guild. There's also Bruma, Clockwork, Project AHO, The Forgotten City, Moonpath to Elsewhere, Worm's Tooth, and I could go on and on. Most of these offer entire new lands, with new quests, NPCs and items. So yeah, there's a lot. And to top things off, a number of the vanilla quests have been improved to offer more dialogue and roleplay options. As for the land itself, there are 3 key mods overhauling every town and city, with those being Dawn of Skyrim, the Great Cities, and Cities of the North. As you can see, these mods turn each location into a far denser settlement, and just makes exploring feel more interesting and more practical. new music has been added from the Northerner Diary, which includes new tracks by Skyrim's original composer. There's also numerous sound and reverb overhauls, which greatly improve the ambience of every location in the game. Have a listen for yourself. The Heavy Armoury mod adds a ton of new weapon types across Skyrim, including quarterstaffs, short swords, tridents, spears and more, so you have far more customization with melee combat. On top of this, there's the Armour and Clothing extension, which adds a huge amount of diversity for the existing attire. So all this, plus the armour and weapons added by quest mods, means that you have more than enough loot to find. When it comes to spells, Librum includes a huge amount of mage diversity, although the previously mentioned spell research mod makes it so the process of learning them is far more in-depth. The main magic mod is Mysticism, which balances existing spells while including powerful ones of its own, such as spells from previous Elder Scrolls games. There's also a bunch of mods focusing on specific mage builds, offering unique spells for shamans, clerics, druids and more. There's even water, earth, fire and air spells for you avatar lovers out there. For some extra points to talk about, by default the UI looks like this, but as you can probably tell, I prefer to have as much screen space as possible, so I use the installation guide to customize it how I want. The Helps to Have a Map mod makes it so you need to have a physical map equipped if you wish to open it. Enemies have a chance of interrupting your sleep in a dangerous location, such as in dungeons. The Complete Alchemy and Cooking overhaul adds new ingredients and recipes, and just makes the process of crafting consumables far more in depth. Wintersun adds benefits to worshipping a deity. The End Times mod gives you 365 days to complete the main quest, before the world actually ends, although this can be disabled if you don't like the time pressure. And finally, some fan favourite followers are included, such as Inigo, Lucian and Hoff. Now for some additions to the list, but first I must stress, any changes you make to the list has nothing to do with the Modlist author. You should only do so if you have an understanding of modding, and accept that any consequences are yours to deal with. Firstly, it's worth going through the gameplay customization section of the install guide, as it says what mods you can switch on and off as you so wish. And there's even a handy guide for fully changing the UI. But when it comes to adding mods of your own, just remember there's a ton of overhauls in Librum, so the chance of stuff conflicting is pretty high. There's actually a mod suggestion page on their Discord, and it's quite interesting seeing all the mods people think should be added, so maybe take a look on there. But yeah, I've not actually got any new mods to suggest, because it's just such a huge list, and there's a lot that could mess up. Oh, and finally, there are patches included for ultrawide, so you know, thank you. There are some people, like myself, who enjoy the survival and roleplay side of Skyrim the most. So when I first saw Librum, I was like, oh cool, another survival list. But Librum is so much more than that. This list isn't afraid to turn Skyrim into a completely different feeling game, where every location and gameplay mechanic feels refreshingly new. It's easily one of the best when it comes to personalising your character, as the amount of new skills and attributes and equipment and so on all work to make each playthrough feel totally different from the last. At the start, you really feel like just some chump trying to live in the harsh wilderness, but eventually you can fully embrace your Dragonborn status and have it completely change how you play. Now for most, there will certainly be a learning curve, which I imagine will put off a lot of people, as at the very least, it's worth skimming through the guide just to understand the basics. Just a lot of stuff like having to sleep for 8 hours to level up and using dragon souls to buy perks are all things that would completely confuse you if you don't at least glance at the guide. But it's one of those things where if you're willing to put in the time, it'll offer one of the most unique and immersive Skyrim experiences to date. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you gave it a like as it helps the channel grow. And if you have any lists you want me to cover, feel free to let me know in the comments. I also have a Discord where we talk about mod stuff or anything else, and a Twitch where I sometimes stream every now and then. Other than that, big thank you to my Patreon supporters, Dweezil P. Pants, Rook, Alec Bentley, Emperador Wolf, Jack Ma, and Christian Hell. Again, just thank you so much. Your contributions really help me, and yeah, just can't thank you enough. And also thank you to Rage, who have recently donated on my Ko-fi account. Thank you so much, and farewell everyone.